So today I'm going to be talking about William C. Bagley's vision for teacher-centered curriculum and teacher preparation in America. So a couple of things about Bagley is that he lived during a time when progressive education was really exploding. And so there are several major points about progressive education include the biggest one is child-centered curriculum, that the child and the child's interests should guide what the learning is and how the learning takes place. But they also challenged a lot of traditional learning practices such as religious indoctrination or religious focus in education. They challenged memorization and repetition, which had been a big part of education. And they rejected traditional learning from textbooks and just books in general. And they were big on learning through experiences. The project method and collaborative learning was a specific type of progressive education practice that was used by William Kirkpatrick, but they also believed in social reform. And so the essentialist education movement, which almost took off and almost was successful, believed in more of a teacher-centered curriculum. And they believed in having a specific set of essential subjects such as math, English, science, history, that were taught in a specific order and giving students specific facts and specific information that they needed to progress on to the next level. And so it was a lot of things based on what you did the previous year and what you were going to do in the future years to come. They also believed in character and ethics education, that creating a morally educated citizen base was really important, specifically for the continuation of democracy. They wanted rigorous subjects and high academic standards. So you can see that the progressive education and essentialist education movements are quite different in what they accept, even though both of them were challenging education of the day. They both approach it in a different way. So on the progressive side, we've got people like John Dewey and William Kirkpatrick, George Counts, Arthur Bester, that were big in this area. We also have Rousseau and Pestalozzi. Those are some other ones that were big part of this group. But also we have, on the essentialist side, we have Bagley, who is going to be the focus of this talk, and Isaac Candell, who were big in this essentialist education movement. So Bagley specifically, these are his 5 main points when it comes to student education. So as I already said, he believed in these specific, what he called essential subjects, things like math, English, science, and history. And not only were you supposed to learn those specific subjects, but you needed to learn them in an organized way. And so you shouldn't just learn whatever you felt like you wanted to learn about history, for example. There needed to be a progression. And he believed that the order in which you presented this information made the difference in how well you learned it, how well you retained it, and what it meant for you going forward. He also believed in a teacher-centered curriculum. One of the things that he challenged was the fact that the progressives believed in this child-centered curriculum, that the child knows what he's interested in and knows what he wants to learn or what she wants to learn. And so children should be directing the learning, directing the activities, directing what is learned, directing what their school day looks like. And he just didn't believe that. He felt like that led to lower standards and that led to schools that were not producing these well-educated graduates, that it was just a place for you to have fun and for things to be pleasant. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about him, what he agreed with the progressives. But one of the things he did agree with was that they made school a little bit more pleasant for students. It wasn't such a cruel and rigorous, well, maybe not rigorous isn't the right word, but it wasn't such a cruel and rote memorization kind of learning, that student voice was important. But the teacher was the guide, and the teacher was the one that knew the order that things should be presented in. He also didn't like the social reform aspect that most people thought that the progressives thought schools should be used for. He didn't think school was a place for creating people who were going to, change the world in terms of some new belief system that nobody else had heard of. And so you didn't want some leader coming in and saying, hey, this is our new belief system, and we need to brainwash these children to also believe the same thing. He believed in presenting information, presenting all the sides of the information, and then letting students decide what they believed, what they agreed with, what they disagreed with, and maybe supporting those opinions. So he didn't want school to be used to indoctrinate students into some political belief system. He also believed that school was a place where you could teach common values and ethics, and preserving that American heritage and teaching students what it meant to be American and what was our culture and what was our heritage, what did we believe, what were our common values, how did we become an ethical citizen. So all of that kind of worked together, and he said school was a good place to do those things. Now, when it came to teacher education, because he was a big proponent of teacher education, there are 4 areas where he felt like teachers should be educated so that they could do this teacher-centered curriculum that he felt was so important. And so one of the things he said was that teaching is a calling. Teaching is not something that you go into haphazardly, that you go into with just this casual, cavalier attitude, that it is something that you are called to do, working with students, helping them achieve, helping them learn. And so it needs to be something that is respected and revered and looked upon as something that is just as important as professions like doctors, lawyers, ministers, leaders in our country. He also believed that teachers needed to know what they were teaching and how to teach it. It wasn't enough to just know what your subject matter was. You also had to know how to teach it and what those methods were that were going to best effectively share that information with students. Along that same line, teacher education needed to include how teachers could create engaging lessons. So as the teacher, your job is to motivate students and get them excited about learning. And you do that through these engaging lessons, that it wasn't enough just to say, here's this book, read this textbook, or here, repeat this information back to me. It needed to be an engaging lesson that would get students involved in what they were learning. And along that same line, following up with that, he believed that teachers are artists or like artists, and that every one of them is different, and the way that they approach learning for students is going to be unique to their personality. They are a human, and they create the lessons based on their own talents and skills and ability. And so just like an artist creates a painting based on his or her abilities, teachers create those lessons along that same line. Now, when we put this into practice, some things that he did, he designed the normal school program for teacher education, and it went along with those 4 points that we just went over, things that he thought teachers needed to have, such as that instruction in those subjects and how to teach them, but also making sure that you had practice in teaching that you had practical experience under the guide of a master teacher, where you would practice teaching with actual students and get some guidance on what you needed to improve. He also was instrumental in bringing education to the universities as an actual department in the school. And so that was really important, that education now wasn't just something that was a side note, that it was an actual department in the school, and it was should be respected as such. Teachers were learning how to take the previous learning, attach it to future learning opportunities, and help students to synthesize both of those situations, that here's what we learned before, here's what we're learning now, and here's how that's going to apply in the future. He did believe that teachers need to learn how to hear students' voices, that hear what their interests were, what their needs were, listen to them, respect to them. But at the end of the day, the teacher is the guide. The teacher is in control of what goes on in that classroom, and that's the most important thing. Teachers needed to, in this, putting it into practice, his instruction for teachers included mastering that content, plus various methods for teaching that content. How am I best going to present this information to students in a variety of ways so that they could best learn it? And then finally, he taught that instruction had to be vetted, that you were not to just grab onto the latest fad in education or the latest buzzword in education and think that that's going to be changing everything for you. That instruction methods needed to be practiced and vetted and tested over time before they were implemented across the board. And just as a side note, I think that's one of the problems that we see in public school today is that a new buzzword comes along and some districts think that, hey, let's go ahead and just implement this for everyone. And we haven't really tried it out, or we don't know if it'll work. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So that's just my little side commentary on that piece. So what did William Bagley think about diversity? So we're going to look at that on the next slide. So when it comes to individualism, diversity, different thoughts, different people, different ethnicities, different belief systems, where did he fall on that spectrum? So these are 4 issues that kind of relate to him. That one of the things that differed between the progressives and the essentialists were assimilation versus individualism. So the progressives were very much into individualism and that the self is most important and you're unique and you should celebrate those differences and celebrate everything that's unique about you. And Bagley, interestingly enough, with his feelings on presenting cultural values that really were unique to America, my feeling is that he would not have accepted multiculturalism, pluralism that we see so much of today. I think he would be a little critical of people wanting so much diversity in terms of, well, we have to appreciate this culture and that culture and understand, have different languages and things presented different ways and all that. I think when it comes to culture, he would have wanted people to assimilate into the American culture. And, I don't know if that's appropriate for today's society, but I think that's where he would have fallen. But what's interesting is that he's a dichotomy in diversity because he also did not like the European education model. Because in that model, only white upper class males were prepared to move on to the university level. And he didn't like that. He felt like the United States needed something better and we could do better. And so he really was a proponent for education for all, and that, we all need to learn and we all need to be a part of our society and become well-educated, moral citizens so that we could vote and we could participate in democracy and all of that. So that is definitely a more diverse, a diversity support issue than the assimilation part. He also was critical of standardized tests in that he liked high standards. He wanted high standards. He wanted there to be rigorous standards, but the standardized tests he was concerned were biased against minority individuals. And so are you testing their intelligence or are you testing their ability to know these questions that are part of your culture? So he did want to make sure that those tests were fair and that whatever examinations we were giving gave a true picture of where you were academically. And then because he was such a proponent of normal schools and teacher education, at his time period, most of people going into education were women. And so I think he would have been a proponent of women's education because he was such a person who promoted teacher education. And there were not a lot of male teachers when he was, proposing these university courses. So women's education, I think, would have been a big part for him. I put the Spock quote on there from The Wrath of Khan just because I felt like his assimilation model would go along with what Spock had to say about the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And I think he would have believed that the needs of the many in terms of democratic society would outweigh the needs of the few who might be of a different race or a different culture or a different belief system. And I think overall, that's kind of where he would fall on diversity. So when we think of people who were either for or against his essentialist education model, we come across these people. So John Dewey believed that learning should take place through your experiences. And John Dewey and Bagley agreed on a couple of things. He liked the fact that John Dewey was challenging the traditional method of education that had been taking place with memorization and religious control and all that. But John Dewey believed that learning should just be for the purpose of promoting human existence in general, just for the sake of learning, not really to prepare you for the next level. And that's kind of where Bagley was, and that's where they really differ. William Kirkpatrick and this project method. So William Kirkpatrick believed in this project method where students were in charge of the learning from the initial phase of the project all the way through the evaluation phase. And so they were in charge, and the teacher's job was just to facilitate. And some of this involved collaborative learning, and some of it involved individual learning. And Bagley wasn't against the project method or collaborative learning, but what he was against was the fact that William Kirkpatrick said this should be the only method of learning. And Bagley said that that's not the way it works, that you should have multiple methods for learning. And project method could be one, collaborative learning could be another, but you don't want to just settle on one and say this is the only way we're going to learn, because you're going to lose your students. And then George Counts, he was big into the social reform idea, in that he believed that schools should be used to create this new democratic society, and that you should use students to prepare them to rebel and challenge authority and all of that. And Bagley just didn't believe that that was appropriate for school. Now, Arthur Bester is an interesting character because he, on the surface, it seems like they would agree. He believed in, essential subjects, and that things should follow in a certain order, and that the teacher should be in charge and all that. However, his technical support, I guess you would say, his seeming support of Bagley was really just a distraction, because what he really wanted was he wanted people to be enrolled in his history department. And he felt like, well, they'll be enrolled in the history department and then they might teach, and that might be okay. But he really wanted to get people enrolled in his history department. He really did not value teaching, and he saw teaching kind of as a lower society. So he didn't revere teaching the way that Bagley felt like you could. So even though it seems like he supported him, it really would not have been a support situation. Now, Isaac Candell supported most of the things that Bagley suggested, things like the essential subjects and the teacher being in charge. He was big into this idea that schools should not be used for social reform. He saw what the schools did in Nazi Germany, where they indoctrinated these kids to follow Hitler. And he felt like that is not what should be going on at school, that we should not be brainwashing these kids to believe, some leader that shows up, that schools need to be used to help students explore their own thoughts and their own beliefs and what their opinions are. And like I said before, Bagley, there was some agreement that he liked the fact that these people that disagreed with him pointed out the importance of student voice, and that students were respected more than they had been in the past, and that there was reform, because he felt like there did need to be reform in education. But he didn't like all of these methods. And so, and what I saw as what he felt like was really the problem is that these people would link on to one method and think this is it, this is the only method. And that's not where he was falling, that he believed that there needed to be these basic subjects, but then the methods that you use to present them, that would be where you would have some difference and some change, and you base it on what your students' needs are and all of that. So I think that's where the difference really comes. Now, his biblical worldview is interesting because he left the Christian faith in his adult life. He was part of a fundamentalist kind of Christianity, and he just felt like it was so strict and so beating people down, that he just thought this is just not the way that life should be. And he believed that there was a lot of good in Christianity because he thought it created moral citizens and that it was usually based out of love and that sort of thing. However, he rejected religious control in education. He did not like seeing the churches being in the sole control of what students learned, and that was their focus, was they were always learning about the Bible or they were always learning about Christianity. And so he felt like schools should not be controlled by religion. But when you look at his methods for teaching, It was very similar to the way that Jesus taught. And I thought that was really interesting that he believed in using compassion, that you were not supposed to be this cruel, heartless teacher that punished students when they didn't learn. Using stories to teach and interesting students based on you motivating them, getting them interested in the learning, just like Jesus did with all of his parables. Using relevance. So using what students knew, using where they were, and what they had learned previously and taking that to another level. And that's what Jesus did. He used stories about farming and about their society and about fishing and things that they would know to help them teach and learn, to help him teach and for them to learn a greater lesson. And I thought that was really impressive. And then teaching being an art form. And of course, we know if we pay attention to Jesus as a teacher, he did teach using an art form. And he didn't just stand up there and tell them what they needed to know. He used stories and he used those parables to help them make a connection. And that's where the power really was in the way he taught. Bagley also believed in serving the common good and that teaching really should transform society, not by indoctrinating students to some belief system, but by creating these morally, ethically educated students that were naturally going to go out and want to improve society by being political leaders or by being teachers themselves, helping out in their community, serving their community. And that's what Jesus would have encouraged us to do. So while he doesn't focus on education, and he actually did leave the church early on, I feel like if the right person had gotten to him maybe before he died, and I don't know that this person didn't get to him, that maybe he would have come back to the church. He seemed to be connected to it in some way. And I found that really interesting. So why does this matter? Why does Bagley matter? So I think Bagley matters because when we think about state testing now, at least in my state of Virginia, is a big deal. In my state, SOL testing, you have to pass a certain number of SOL tests, these are standards of learning tests, to get your high school diploma. You have to have a certain number of verified credits, and you get those verified credits from passing these tests. And it is stressful. And I would agree with Bagley that we need high rigorous standards. We need to have high academic standards for our students. But this state testing is putting a lot of pressure on students and teachers because it's all about the test. And everything you do in the classroom has to go back to the test. And I don't know that Bagley would have really agreed with these high stakes testing because too many districts and too many teachers are teaching to the test. And I think he would have really disagreed with that because it takes out that human creativity, that human function. Another thing, as a National Board certified teacher, I know that the National Board has 5 core propositions about what accomplished teachers do in the classroom every day. Core Proposition 2 says, accomplished teachers know the subjects that they teach and how to teach those subjects to students. And that is just Bagley's philosophy in a nutshell, that those teachers know. They've mastered those subjects. They know all about it. For me, so it's English. For me, it's English. And I've mastered that English content. And then I know how to present it to students who have not mastered the content, and so that they can move closer to understanding how to read and write and communicate and think critically. And so that's what accomplished teachers do. And I think Bagley would have liked the National Board process and the National Board standards because they're all about what accomplished teachers do in the classroom every day to help their students succeed. Hey, and then this idea of a human teacher, I touched on that already, that we're not supposed to teach to the test. We are not supposed to teach to some random standard and just give students information. We are supposed to think about our students. What are their needs? Who are these people? And what is right for that student on that day, in that moment, for that particular core situation? And I think Bagley would have supported that. And then not following the current buzzwords. With technology especially, a new program or a new app comes out almost daily, and it says it's going to change your world in the classroom. And too many districts and too many teachers are just antsy to jump on that buzzword and try that new app and just implement it across the board. And I'm not saying don't try technology, because you really should. But I think we need to be honest with students that, hey, here's this new app. Let's try it and see if it increases our learning, before we just decide that we're going to change our entire education philosophy based on, the Canvas program or even Google Suite of Education. I mean, whatever it is, let's make sure that it actually works and that it actually increases our learning. And that is only going to be tested over time. So when we're implementing those new buzzwords or those new fads, I think it needs to be one of our methods. And as we're implementing this new technique, we're also doing our time-tested techniques. And we're seeing how they compare and seeing if they work. And I think that's the way that we become better teachers. And I think Bagley would have supported that. So that's my little snippet on William C. Bagley. And so I hope you've enjoyed this video and that you've learned a little bit about the essentialist education movement and what Bagley meant to that movement and what he means to education today. So thanks for watching.